Okay, welcome to the 27th Virtual History of 2021 presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation and Baltimore Heritage. My name is Nathan Denny's. I'm the Associate Director of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. First, thank you to everyone who donated to be with us today. Your support has been crucial as our organizations navigate the pandemic. And next week, I hope you will join us for a talk about the history of Woodbury presented by me. I'll be recounting 200 years of development from its origins as a mill village to the neighborhood it is today. And before we get started, Melanie Ray of the board of Bmore NOMA and AIA Baltimore has an announcement to make. Melanie?
Thanks, Nathan. As Nathan mentioned, my name is Melanie Ray. I'm the Vice President and Treasurer of Bmore NOMA, one of the proud partners with AIA Baltimore and the Baltimore Architecture Foundation to bring Say It Loud here to Baltimore with my friend and colleague, Pascale Sablan. So we're excited to be able to bring this here. I just wanted to share, we are the Baltimore Chapter of the National Organization of Minority Architects. If you'd like to learn more and join our organization, our next general body meeting will be September 30th at the Center for Architecture and Design. The registration for that will be released soon, and it'll be a hybrid event, so you can attend virtually or in person. So thank you for letting me make that plug.
Thank you, Melanie. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Pascale Sablan. She is the founder and director of Beyond the Bill, which created the Great Designer Library and the Say It Loud exhibitions. An exhibition that we are very proud to be able to bring to Baltimore, and that will launch in person at the Baltimore Center for Architecture and Design in the beginning of October, and is currently available to view online virtually. The exhibition spotlights diverse designers and built environment professionals in Maryland. Pascale is a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and among her many awards, Pascale is a 2021 recipient of the Whitney M. Young Jr. Award. She is joining us from New York, where she is an architect at Auger Associates. Pascale, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for participating with us today. I know there's many Zoom options, so I'm always excited when you are able to join us and have these meaningful conversations. Really wanted to elevate the identities of women and BIPOC designers of our communities. And the reason that that's important is as we do advocacy work to ultimately dismantle racism and oppression in both the built environment and in the profession, it's important that we have representation because representation matters. And it's important to identify and document our contributions to the built environment and to this world, and to really celebrate. This effort of Say It Loud exhibitions really first encourages people to start to document themselves, to be the author of how they're introduced to the world, as well as put themselves in a location, in a place that can be engaging with beyond just the architecture profession, but actually society at large, to really create programming around these exhibitions that allow everyone to walk by and know about the legends and heroes who have designed and constructed their built environment that they frequent every day, and really give that gratitude and respect to the profession as these professionals are here and we have so much to teach and learn from. And also, because it's self-submitting and this is a contemporary exhibition, you are all also accessible to these new inspired minds that are excited about potentially joining us, to reach out to you, to join you at your offices, to meet with you for a Zoom lunch, if you will, and be in a place where you can be bespoken and answer questions to these individuals. Very much of our education is having us glorify architects who have been here and have passed away, and it feels out of reach and just another level of disengagement. And so really creating you all and providing this platform and offering you all as a resource to the community is also really critical and important as well. And with the Say It Loud efforts, it's a collective force and a collective mission where you all who have was brave and was able to share your stories, share your work, share your inspirations, are now part of our Great Diverse Designers Library. And the reason why I said great is because when you Google the words great architects, Google banner comes up with 50 names and faces, only one of which is a woman, Zaha Hadid. 0 are African American, and a few minorities. And when I went to Google's headquarters and asked, why is this the result? Their response was, there's not enough content that lists you all as great. So I am making sure to create a library that lists you all as great because you are, to give you the shine and elevation for the work that you've done because you deserve it, and continue to create a relationship and a bridge with you and your community members, both locally and globally, to know about your identity and your work, and hopefully continue to push your work publicly to get it captured in press, publications, and provide financial justice where you're able to get more work, more projects that are in line with your talents and your brilliance as well. So these distinguished panelists I'm so excited to engage with today really are going to spend a few minutes each presenting their work, who they are, and really get to introduce them. So instead of me trying to introduce them to you all, following the same mission of Beyond the Builds and Say It Loud, they are going to elevate themselves and tell their story, and then we're going to have a dynamic and engaging conversation about that process. So first up.
Yeah, thank you. Helen, I'm about to start screen sharing for you here.
Okay. I'm Helen Staley, the one sitting on my mother's lap. She was my inspiration. She graduated from Cornell University, took landscape architecture, and her degree said agriculture. My parents had the three of us right away, and mother, in spite of the three of us demanding her attention, she was able to practice landscape architect locally with making plans, landscape plans for a former home of President Grover Cleveland in northern New Jersey. At an early age, I found a house being constructed in the early stages and climbed all over it, loved it, and have always admired the structural part of any building. High school, I was accidentally placed in mechanical drawing, which I thoroughly enjoyed. That led to architectural drawing, and then on to college. I was accepted at Cornell Architecture, but family matters said no, and I went to Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri, and that Stevens College for women, and boy, it was for women. I knew it as soon as I went to the University of Pennsylvania, where I applied for architecture, and was told by the dean that I would receive a Bachelor of Fine Arts, not a Bachelor of Architecture. And I said, well, it's the content of the material presented that mattered, not the paper. So I was accompanied by one woman in our class of men, and we studied classical and contemporary architecture. Our last design problem was a TV studio. This was during World War II, so there weren't any new TV studios built. So I spent hours and days in the electrical engineering library, accumulating as much as I could about TV and how it worked. This is my presentation. It went to New York for jury and was awarded first place. My fellow woman architect also got a first place. There was no second, and a man from South America got third place. So I married, had 2 children right away. He and I helped start a community church where we lived. This was in the Baltimore suburbs, Herondale and Glen Burnie. And when they discovered that I took architecture, they decided that like it or not, I would design the church, the first church, part of the church, which we knew would be eventually the educational building. So then a news reporter took this picture as he was doing an article in the Sun papers on women in the workplace. That was in 1948, I think. Yes. So put yourself back there, and boy, oh boy. My architectural internship included New York City, Charlottesville, Virginia, Baltimore City, and Annapolis, Maryland. On the spur of the moment, I took the 4-day registration exam and passed in 1955. I attended meetings when I was an architectural draftsman. I was the only woman there except for the executive secretary of the Baltimore AIA chapter. Eventually, I helped organize the Chesapeake Bay AIA chapter as charter treasurer. The Herondale Church planned for a sanctuary lounge and choir room, which I designed. I designed everything in this sanctuary: altar, pews, cross, size, location, hymnal selector. And the sanctuary itself reflects the classical part of architecture taught at Penn, when I was there. The last project was a superimposed movie theater with 1 projection room. Think about that. Think about the lower movie room that has. Anyway, I closed my practice in 2005 after 50 years. Occasionally, I consult, and I wanted you to know that a contemporary architect said, never say you're a retired architect. Say you're once an architect, always an architect.
Thank you, Helen. It's a real honor to have you be here with us today. Helen was the first woman to become a member of the Baltimore chapter of the American Institute of Architects in 1955. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Agreed. That was amazing. And I am even more honored to be on this panel with you, Helen. Thank you for all of the work that you did, being one of the only women in the state of Maryland and blazing the path for those who came after you. So thank you for that. So my name is Nikita Reed. I am a preservation architect in Baltimore. I feel like I was a little bit in Helen's footsteps a couple decades later, because I also went to the University of Pennsylvania. So this is exciting. So anyways, my story is that I got into architecture because I grew up outside of DC, and I didn't understand why I was seeing vacant buildings and homeless people on the same block, on the same street. It just didn't make sense to me that there were people sleeping outside of buildings that were unused, because in my mind, buildings needed people and people needed buildings. And so for me, architecture and preservation have always gone hand in hand. And so I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be an architect, but I didn't know or had the language to know that preservation was a different field that was allied to architecture, but not necessarily one and the same. So I went and studied architecture undergrad at the University of Virginia and did some preservation courses there. Throughout my time in undergrad, I had the opportunity to intern for a preservation architect in DC, and then I got just more into preservation. So then I ended up going to the University of Pennsylvania for a master's in architecture, master's in historic preservation, as well as a certificate in ecological architecture, because I've also been interested in how preservation has the power to tell the full history and serve as the remnants of the past and the people who came before us, as well as the sustainability aspects of preservation and how it's more sustainable to reuse an existing building as opposed to just throwing it away and sending it to the landfill. Next slide, please, Nathan. And so for after grad school, I had the fortune to co-found a small architecture practice, and I ran that for 7 years with a former business partner and mentor. And so here are some of the sample projects that I worked on. So in the top right, there's a 1924 mansion. So that's the interior before and after. And that became the nonprofit headquarters for Casa de Maryland. But historically, it was just someone's house. And then also on the bottom right, there's the grist mill in Perryville for the Veteran Affairs Administration. And so got to do some construction administration for another preservation architect on that. The bottom left is Menoken, and so that is the former home to one of the Virginia signers of the Declaration of Independence, Francis Lightfoot Lee. And so at the time, our firm did the historic structures report and worked on being the historic architect for the ruin of the building so that we could stabilize the structure to allow it to then accept the new glass and steel armature to support the missing volume. And then the top left photo, while it may look like I'm just holding up the number 1, my finger is actually pointing to some people that are on top of the roof of the building behind me. And so for that one, we were actually doing a mock-up for the National Park Service and the tax credits to better explain how there was going to be some interventions done on the Bell North Theater in Baltimore. Next slide. And so throughout my career, I've really been enjoying connecting with people and being a connector across disciplines. And so these are a couple different photos from events that I've gone to both at AIA conventions, NOMA events at AIA conventions, as well as NOMA, or the National Organization of Minority Architecture National Organization of Minority Architects. NOMAS is the student chapter, but NOMA conferences, as well as the Association for Preservation Technology. The photo in the middle bottom is from one of those conferences. And so for me, it's always been, how do I connect the fields of architecture, preservation, and sustainability? Because for me, they're all connected and they all rely very heavily on each other. When I was doing a dual degree at Penn, it was interesting because my architecture cohorts, some of those colleagues, they felt that preservationists just got in the way of progress. And then my preservation colleagues, some of them just felt like architects didn't know how to design or detail because Frank Lloyd Wright's buildings leaked and architects were so egotistical. But for me, it was always there needed to be both and, because as preservationists, we want to make sure that we are preserving something and we have job security to keep the built environment telling the story and telling the full story of those who came after, and how do we also make sure we can be good stewards of buildings for those living today and into the future. And then for architects, I would hope that we are all designing things that we would want someone to preserve and care for 50 years from now. So for me, the continuum of design and preservation and architecture is something that's always fascinated me. Go ahead to the next slide, Nathan. So currently I am working at Quinn Evans out of our Baltimore office. And so this is one of the projects I'm working on now. It is the Ambassador Theater in Liberty Heights. The theater was designed in 1935 and it's been vacant for about the past 10 to 15 years. And so we are working with a nonprofit organization to bring this back and turn it into a community engagement and community performance space. There'll be rental spaces and places for artists to create art as well as explore digital space and media. So we're excited for that one to come online probably in 2024. And then I believe I have one more slide, I think. And then the project that I actually submitted for the Say It Loud exhibit is called Hyacinth's Way. It is a new net zero affordable housing project in Washington, D.C. That's going to be for senior citizens who have a mental health diagnosis. And so this project, I'm super excited to be able to be the project manager of and working with a really great design team to bring this to fruition. And so one of the things I love about the process of bringing a building to fruition is that no one designs in a vacuum, and it's such a big team to make this happen. And so this one, I'm excited to combine affordable housing and net zero design and bring that to the community. And that's my last slide. I think I'm a little bit out over time. Sorry, on to the next.
That's okay, Nikita. Sarsfield.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank AIA Baltimore, the Baltimore Foundation, Architecture Foundation, NOMA Baltimore, most importantly, Pascale, for creating this profound opportunity to speak on the history of my work and also to learn about so many other great builders, architects, and professional people in this industry. I don't think that it can be measured at this point how important this work is, how inspiring it will be to others that are interested in the field. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank the organizations in Pascale and also to congratulate the other winners. I understand that I am a part of a body of winners from the state of Maryland that have done phenomenal work. I've enjoyed learning about you and look forward to learning more. I am the principal founder of Aspire Homes. We are home builders in historic West Baltimore, primarily focusing on the role that the home plays in determining health outcomes for families and children. I didn't have a traditional route to becoming a builder. When I was young, I was very fortunate to be born the son of a carpenter. My dad graduated from Carver Vocational High School in 1964 and was the first African-American carpenter hired at the Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. My maternal, great-grandfather was one of the first landscapers in Roland Park. So there's a long history of builders in my blood. I've all my life borne witness to the way in which builders collectively come together to create opportunities to better the quality of life for families. My father has, up until this day, continued, he called me this morning at 6:15, continued to build. He's in his early 80s now, and I come from a very rich tradition of always seeing Black men working. And I think it's very important when we think about Baltimore City, you have to begin with the history of how African Americans have fought for the opportunity to work. I have defined Baltimore City as the nation's capital of civil rights history. We are we have inherited a very profound and rich history in African American civil rights legacy. Obviously, as we all know about the uprisings and the current state of our society that African Americans and other minority groups are currently petitioning for rights to their full humanity, rights to full citizenship. And that struggle really began in Baltimore. When I was a student at University of Maryland, I was in my second year studying mechanical engineering. And after about at the 3/4 mark, I just remember being completely impressed with the volume of information I was reading about the African-American history of my people. And everywhere along the line in my study, Baltimore was central to our people's elevation, central to our people's empowerment. And I found myself significantly drawn more to understanding that portion of our history. And ultimately, I woke up one morning and I said, 20 years from now, I could become a mechanical engineer, have my own business, and do something in that arena. But I'll wake up every morning and look in the mirror and not know who I am. And I said to myself during that time that I did not want to wake up and be that person. So my schedule shifted, my major shifted, and I began to immerse myself in the study of the African-American history, and particularly the way in which economics have impacted our people over time. And in that light, prior to becoming a builder, I learned from Morgan State University, who had a educational program, financial educational program that discussed financial health in the African-American community, that the home was the primary source of wealth that is passed from one generation to the next. And this was when I was, fairly young, obviously wasn't a homeowner at that time, but I remember saying to myself and thinking to myself how powerful that was, and what is this relationship between home ownership, wealth building, and then obviously what I was seeing every day in terms of the violence that was taking place in Baltimore. So there was this intersectionality between economics, the history of our people, and the need to address the violence that were in our streets. And I'd like to begin with a segment from the Economic Policy Institute, a small segment. I like to read this, and it says this was written in April of 2015. It says in 1910, in Baltimore, a Black Yale law student graduate purchased a home in a previously all-white neighborhood. The Baltimore city government reacted by adopting a residential segregation ordinance restricting African Americans to designated blocks. At that time, the Baltimore mayor proclaimed Blacks should be quarantined in isolated slums in order to reduce the incidence of civil disturbance and to protect property values among the white majority. Thus began a century of federal, state, and local policies to quarantine Baltimore's Black population in isolated slums, policies that continue to this present day, as federal housing subsidies policies still disproportionately direct low-income Black families to segregated neighborhoods. Federal, state, and local agencies have employed implicit racial laws, policies, and regulations to ensure that Black Americans would live impoverished and separated from whites. Baltimore's ghettos were not created by private discrimination, income differences, personal preferences, or demographic trends, but by purposeful action of government in violation of the 5th, 13th, 14th Amendments. These constitutional violations have never been remedied, and we are still paying the price for this in the violence that we see every day. Next slide. Then it goes on and on. Next slide, please. You skipped one. Back prior. Okay, so when you think about the history of redlining, Baltimore City in 1910 began the history of redlining. And not only did it begin, but it was followed by other cities throughout our nation. And the core area that has been in my focus has been centered, if you take a look at the area directly in the center, that area is historic West Baltimore. And there are over 120 historic designations of African-American significance. And this work was done by the Baltimore Heritage Foundation. And that area, in my opinion, is the most significant Black civil rights property, land, and community in America. So I said to myself as a student, what will you do with all this, not with all this history? What will you do as a native Baltimorean, a son of a builder, a recipient of the community of teachers and educators and public school officials that have enabled you to go into the University of Maryland, a university that did not always allow African Americans to study? What will you do with this knowledge? And how can you take this knowledge to assist in helping the economic trajectory of our people? Today, according to many different sources, the median household wealth of Black families is 10% of white households. Andrew Perry from the Brookings Institute is a scholar in this arena, and he continues to present information that is very, very informative to our work. So I said, what will you do? Okay, you do know that housing is critical to the economic progress of your people. You also know that our history in Baltimore is extremely unique. So why not create a model home for families to come back into historic West Baltimore, to invest in that community, to help preserve all of the historic sites, and most importantly, help uplift the individuals, the children, and the young people that are in that community that don't know how sacred this particular community is. Next slide. So what we've done, again, with the history that I've spent, I've helped to locate certain West Baltimore African-American historic landmarks. And I believe that these landmarks can be a driver for economic growth. I believe that the city of Baltimore and state of Maryland owe it not just to our current constituents and current population of people, but also for posterity. There's a quote that simply says, no people can look to posterity without first looking at their ancestors. And we have a profound opportunity. There's so many African-American historians, and this is a community of Black pioneers from the Brotherhood of Liberty. These gentlemen founded many different legal, they were the forerunners in being the legal minds and parishioners that came together to assist in getting African-American teachers in various schools throughout the city. The NAACP was founded in one of the gentlemen's living rooms. They stand on the steps of a property in West Baltimore. The images that you see are all individuals that have had roots in historic West Baltimore. I could go on and on and on about the relationship between the great Dr. John Campbell and the Mediso Club that founded, that supported young Thurgood Marshall when he ran out of funds as a young NAACP attorney. He went to John Campbell, who was president of the president of the Mediso Club, and received the very last $15,000 so that schools and institutions would no longer be segregated. There's a transcript right now in the Maryland Historical Society where the telegram that he actually typed is there requesting those funds. So I'm suggesting that we designate a 2-mile radius as a national historic site, that we mandate CHAP development and CHAP compliance for all renovation projects. We establish historic West Baltimore as an African-American historic community, and we brand it as such. Way signing, the streets, everything about this community needs to be designated. That's where all the great minds of architects and designers and landscape architects can come together. We have partnerships right now with the University of Maryland, College Park, longstanding support there from their School of Architecture, the Great Morgan State, Coppin University, Howard School of Engineering. And we can collectively, I believe, based on researches we'll get into shortly, that we can create a Black home ownership renaissance. African Americans, and if you don't mind, you can go. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, of course, is that there are federal funds at the National Historic Trust that are designated to preserving African American historic sites, and no location in America has more historic sites per capita than historic West Baltimore. So next slide, please. So what, and in response to what I said I would do, is I went into historic West Baltimore and Reservoir Hill and looked at all of the housing types And from those various housing types, I chose the most difficult type, a 3-story vacant shell, to create a model home that was designed for replication. And this home would be based upon 4 pillars. The first pillar being the profound need for entrepreneurship. And this was back in 2005. The profound need for African-American entrepreneurship in our community. The profound need for the African community to read the history of the African diaspora. If you are aware of the way in which the social uprisings are causing book sales in African-American bookstores to explode in sales, I'm very excited about the future of working with bookstores and the role that literature plays in informing and growing our knowledge of our history. I also thought that it would be very important to feature art throughout the process in the home. Art that's interchangeable, art that speaks to the history of our people and affirms the beauty of who we are. Also, the very first portion of my career was spent working with young people, our most vulnerable children, in foster care and in low-income communities. And what I've learned is that through art helps children process their emotions better. So I wanted to infuse art throughout the home. And then most importantly, my love for music. One of the most important decisions I made when I was in college in my freshman year was not to have a television during my 4 years in college, and to learn to fill that space with music, with literature, with thought, with discussion. And I wanted to create a space that spoke to the needs of the African-American community. To date, we've had, next slide, over 4,218 guests exactly toured this building over a 10-year period of time. And it was recently sold in the community. And we are very excited about the way in which this could be not the exclusive model, but a basis of design for future models, 2-story homes, addressing single family, all the single women that are in the community, addressing the need for the middle class to come back into downtown, and most importantly, surrounding our people with the beauty of our culture. Next slide.
Hey, Sarsfield, we need to move on to Charleston here. So if you have any final words before we move along.
Next slide, I'll have just one final statement.
Yeah.
Housing researchers are increasingly aware that the physical quality of homes play a significant hand in families and children's life outcomes. I believe that historic West Baltimore has a profound opportunity to surround our 21st century schools, to infuse our children with the beauty of our unique history. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity to share our work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarsfield. Charleston.
You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Nathan. My name is Charleston Britton Jr., and I'm very honored to be a part of this panel of such established and significant practitioners and professionals. So thanks to AIA Baltimore and BAF and Bmore NOMA and Pascale for giving me this opportunity to participate in this conversation. So yeah, the Bloomstool. Next slide, please. So I think to speak to my experiences in design and as a designer, I kind of have to bring it back to New Orleans, which is where I'm from. New Orleans is a very big part of me and who I am. And a lot of the experiences and the culture and the places that exist in New Orleans have been embedded in me in a profound way. And I think pretty much most decisions or anything that's resulted of my design process is going to be, a direct evolution and iteration of the things that I've learned from the people and stories and everything I've taken from that city. So that's a place to start. And this image in particular is, this image in particular is of the after effects of Katrina, and that little yellow dot is where my house is. And I can remember back in that time when I was in middle school kind of imagining that there was a bubble surrounding my house, even though you would see these images after images and video after video of water to the rooftop. So that kind of puts into perspective of how such a big event like that started to really shape the way I thought about the built environment and who's affected by it and who starts to shape that discussion. So next slide, please. So this image is actually speaking to some of that culture that's in New Orleans. This is on Mardi Gras Day. This is my family. We used to design a float every year and take that apart with all the other parades, and that's little me at the bottom in the little yellow circle. So I just wanted to speak to the beauty and the majesticness of New Orleans and how much of an impact it plays in across the world. Next slide, please. So inspiration. I actually made this stool at a school called the Washington Alexandria Architecture Consortium in Alexandria, Virginia. So I studied there for a year during my time at LSU. And that was my first introduction to the DMV, this area in particular, and what really started to create a real interest in this area. And for this stool, next slide, please. The prompt or the big push was to kind of try to design a product that used alternative or overlooked materials. And I have to give a lot of credit to my professor because he pushed me to kind of look at foam. I started to develop this interest in foam, and he really pushed me to stay on this track. And so you can see in some of these iterations of other people's use of foam of how I started to really look at how structure can give some path to the uncertainness of this wooden spool material. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So these are a couple images of my process. You can go to the next slide. In some of these iterations, I was really trying to start to investigate form, what foam did, how you could capture it, what kind of reliefs it had. If you dyed it, does that affect the material properties? And I think, next slide, please. You can start to see, I started to gravitate towards how I could add a little bit of structure, which was using some cylindrical forms to kind of give shape to the uncertainness of the foam and how it rose. And in that process, I really started to develop some ideas on not just form, but organization, what this mask could possibly be, because at that point, I still had no idea what I was going to use this for. But next slide, please. You can start to see that the little foams gave me an idea to kind of make it into a stool, like the seat of a stool. So this is some excerpts of that stool in process when I poured the foam and I let it rise. So that became the resultant. Next slide, please. Next slide. So this is the final images of the stool, and it was definitely a really good investigation into how the design process, or how I was learning the design process, could take shape, and how I could use a lot of the things that I've learned over my short time in design, being aware of it, and create something beautiful. So yeah, appreciate the time. Next slide, please. I think that's the last image. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Charleston. So we have a few questions for everyone. We're just going to come together. Pascale, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hello. So that was really amazing, getting a sense and a breadth of work that starts from preservation to urban planning, all the way to the scale of the individual. And it's important that we identify all the ways that we impact the built environment and impact the community, which is amazing. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the first question. Tell us how you were exposed to the profession. And this is important because one of the first questions that I asked you in the Say It Loud kind of survey is asking what inspired you. And it's interesting to see all the ways that we're introduced into the profession. So I'll start that question to Helen, if you can answer that, please.
How are you inspired?
How were you exposed to the profession?
how were you exposed to the profession?
I was exposed to the, I was exposed by my mother, who was a landscape architect. And I started architectural drawing in high school. And that brought me to eventually to University of Pennsylvania. I was determined to take architecture, and no one discouraged me. They tried some, but anyway, I did. I became registered. I did practice and had children at the same time. So mothers can balance.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nikita, can you answer the same question? How were you
Yeah.
exposed to
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to do something with the built environment, but what really got me excited about architecture, as silly as this sounds, was a really cool pop-up book. It was like an architecture pop-up book where it was like the Colosseum would pop up, and then it was like throughout different styles and things, all the way to like the Revit house, and it was just kind of like, this is so cool. And so then I remember it was like a middle school teacher had the pop-up book in the class, and then in high school I was able to start taking AutoCAD drafting courses and architectural drawing, and just kept getting more and more into the profession that way.
Wonderful. Sarsfield? Oh, you're on mute.
I was first exposed to the industry at the age of 18. One of my father's friends had a close friend that was an architect. He was actually one of the architects that was designing the Homo Buildelsky building. It was the hospital at the University of Maryland. And he said to me that if I were interested in the building industry, the best way to learn about the building industry was to learn to read blueprints. So at a very, very young age, I was presented with about a roll of 800 sheets that was like so overwhelmingly greater than anything else I'd ever seen in my life. And I said, how in the world do human beings produce this much information at that young age and processing it? And I was actually responsible for coordinating all the ASIs. So it was a very serious job. I understood the legality of it at a very young age. And that, along with my mom, I have to give my mom credit because she was very avid about taking her children to the library. So, you know, we went to the library almost like every week. So I was always introduced to reading very, very early, and had a subscription to Architectural Record, and found myself very fascinated with the myriad of design and the ways in which human beings lived inside of building spaces and how creative it was. So that was my early exposure.
Thank you. And Charleston?
Yeah, I wasn't really introduced to architecture until sometime in high school. I was looking for a major, and I knew I wanted to, engineering definitely wasn't for me. It's a little too much math. But I was always interested in like trying to combine, the analytical, but then also the art. And like I was saying before, Katrina was just such a big impact, and it always had me thinking about the built environment, but not, in terms of who designed those buildings. I guess I knew someone did, but I just didn't know that was an entire profession. So not until I started looking at majors did I really learn architecture was a thing. And not only was a thing, there was interior design, there was landscape, there's so many realms in design, and it was all around me. So that was really good, the way I learned about the profession and everything it entails.
Wonderful. So as I guess a follow-up to everyone, and anyone can answer it, how can we more effectively promote careers in the built environment to diverse kids and women of who are typically underrepresented in the profession?
I'll jump in first, I guess. So I think panels like this are a great start, but then also I know NOMA has Project Pipeline. We're trying to really connect to younger kids to help them understand their options. But I think even just also making sure that there are architects and people of color who are talking about the profession and demystifying it. Because I think for so often people are like, oh, you're an architect. I wanted to be an architect, but I wasn't good at math. I was like, and that's okay. You can still be an architect even if you're not great at math. Like, so anyway, so I think it's also demystifying it a little bit and just talking more about the profession openly on platforms like this. I think this is great.
Anyone else want to answer that question? Although that was a great response. All right, jumping into, oh, perfect.
Oh yeah, sure. I was just thinking what Nikita was saying, just demystifying the profession, because I think there's a cloak, you know, behind the whole development profession and just all the different stakeholders and everybody who plays a part in it. So I think even something as simple as, you know, introducing design thinking to, you know, existing programs would make a huge difference in terms of like how we start to think about problems and problem solving in a different way. And that I think would open doors to professions like architecture.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in. I agree. I think that we have an obligation to reach our young people. They are filled with creativity. Many African-American young people live in impoverished communities and walk outside and perceive poverty every day. Neuroscientists understand that our imaginations are connected in the space between our perceptions and our understanding. So if we're not giving young people a greater understanding of what they perceive, it's very hard for them to imagine something better. So I think that the industry, I mean, across all disciplines, not just architecture, but all disciplines, all of the building trades owe a very serious critique to how we can accept the fact that young people learn differently. There are myriads of careers that can be established to help improve the quality of our communities. And unfortunately, most of our young people in urban communities are just not exposed to them. So somehow we have to break that wall that exists between our profession, the legality of ensuring that children are safe on construction sites, and hopefully build models in the community in the future so that they can walk in and see the infrastructure of how buildings are put together and learn about the various careers that are associated with each of those industries.
Wonderful. Couldn't have said better myself. The next question is, the design profession has a long history of disregarding diverse people and their spaces. The events of the past few years have called a lot of attention to the issue. Alluding to the tides of change, how do you see the role of women and BIPOC designers and community groups practitioners in changing the narrative? And how can the design profession at large support the change of these narratives? And is the responsibility, where does the responsibility ultimately lie? So we'll start with you, Nikita, on this one.
Sure. And so I think part of it is getting the stories out there. So one of the reasons why I was so excited to see that Helen was on this panel was that Helen was one of the first women in the state of Maryland operating in all of these spaces. But her story isn't necessarily something that has been shared widely. And so the fact that there is this platform where more people can know about the work that she's done and kind of just highlighting the fact that women have been here, people of color have been here doing the work. It's just that we haven't necessarily been the main character, if you will. They're just great saying that history has been viewed as kind of like a stage production where the spotlight has just been on the stage, but we're raising the house lights to really show everyone who's in the room to be able to tell a fuller story. So being able to really demystify and highlight the work that's been being done by women and BIPOC people of color, or that's redundant, but you know what I mean. I think that will just help demystify and remove some of these preconceived notions that the built environment has only been controlled and contributed to by white males.
I'm so happy this is being recorded. I'm going to take all these sound bites. I'm going to use them in my future lecture and presentations and website, I promise. Sarsfield, do you want to answer that question as well, please?
Sure. Let's be clear. Young people are interested in careers that make money. This week, the Harvard Joint Center on Housing Studies reported that for the very first time, Americans spent $420 billion in home renovations. That number is now competing with the number that drives the economy, which is the new construction number. We are in a place, obviously, as African Americans that need economic growth in every stretch, every way. I think that it's critical for us to open the full doors of understanding to how important these jobs are for the community in terms of transforming our environments. But I also believe it's critical that we say these are very lucrative environments, these are very lucrative careers. These careers will help you provide for your family. Right now, the construction industry is viewed as an industry that is not associated with wealth, it's not associated with individuals of higher learning, and that could not be any further from the truth. From the skilled labor that shows up every day, that provides all of the direction on project sites, to the architects, to the accountants. There's so many different great jobs involved in every project. If I had one wish, I would have wished that the city of Baltimore spent 10 years prior to the building of the 21st century schools and creating a program that would infuse Baltimore City public school children with the opportunities to learn about every single career necessary for the building of those schools.
Thank you. Charleston?
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with both remarks. And I think it's also a twofold question, or a twofold answer, in that I think the stakeholders, the people who have these building opportunities, I think it's incumbent on them to select more diverse designers, to lead those projects. But I think it's also a task or a challenge for us as BIPOC designers and other women designers, of how to, I guess, enact some change or affect change on built space without that backing, because that backing is not necessarily going to come. So I think it's incumbent on us to also figure out, are there ways we can crowdsource, pull together, and just think about things in a creative way to, start to get some other built projects, into place.
Yeah, and I think raising the visibility and the work of you all is part of kind of getting access to those business opportunities. And then Helen, if you can round us out with their answer to this question, please.
In 1999, we moved from Anne Arundel County to Easton on the Eastern Shore. And I discovered that there were more women architects practicing there than men. Imagine that. So, and they were allowed to advertise the fact that they were architects practicing. We were not allowed to do that no, we weren't. We were allowed to have signs, the yellow pages of the telephone. That was it. But aren't you happy about the majority of women in Easton that were practicing architecture?
That's incredible. Incredible. Okay, I'm realizing our time together is up already. And I really enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about you all. And I really want to again encourage everyone to explore our Say It Loud Maryland virtual gallery. And we will be having a physical exhibition open soon, so that we can pull and have people come visit, have the community come see and celebrate and elevate you all. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our distinguished panelists for sharing their stories, I really learned a lot and really am inspired by everything that you do and all the work and all your contributions to the built environment. So Nathan, if you want to come back on and give a good hearty goodbye to everyone.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much, Pascale, and thank you again to our panel. This was such a great discussion. And I hope, put this on your calendars, October 1st is when the exhibition will be opening at the Baltimore Center for Architecture and Design. So I hope that we can see you in person then. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Say it loud.